steps on American soil for the first time and hugs his family. We're going to talk with the parents of Trevor Reed about the effort to free him from a gulag in Russia. Great to have you with us for Verdict Watch. Live from our Chicago studios, the Donlon Report starts right now. Good evening. We have never seen a case quite like this one unfolding in Wisconsin. That's why we're all glued to the outcome. And that is the pulse of America tonight. It was basically a street war, as we saw in videos played in court, during a curfew, during riots. So the question among many, was Kyle Rittenhouse asking for trouble by going to Kenosha? Were all of the others who were there? Was it smart? No. But was it illegal? And is it part of the case? Well, that's what we're about to find out. This is the muddled mess the jury is deliberating as we speak. Court cases aren't usually as gripping as this one has been. It's a legal proceeding by nature, not always exciting, but this trial has been riveting. From Rittenhouse breaking down on the stand to the judge's outbursts.
That's right, Ron.
Why would you think that that made it okay for you, without any advance notice, to bring this matter before the jury? I was astonished when you began your examination by commenting on the defendant's post-arrest silence.
So we also have a lasting image of the prosecutor aiming a rifle during closing arguments, one of many decisions surely to be scrutinized, especially if Rittenhouse is acquitted. And then today, well, you might think handing the case to the jury is as routine as it gets, but instead we saw Rittenhouse himself selecting the names of the jurors in what looked like a bizarre game of bingo. Usually the drama is reserved for outside the courthouse, and tonight crowds are gathering in Kenosha waiting for the verdict. And there is plenty of conversation about race, media, and politics happening on social media. We will dive into that as well. And take a look at this from Bill Ackman, a billionaire hedge fund manager who's a self-described liberal. He had this to say after Rittenhouse testified: "Our first-hand impressions of Kyle were materially different from those we had previously formed based on media reports and opinion pieces that we had consumed. Media and political bias are dividing our country and destroying lives." Our friend and frequent guest, Robbie Soave, standing by to discuss that. He'll join us in just a few minutes, but let's go to two great legal voices we've leaned on in the past, and they are back tonight: Mark Eiglarsh and Trent Copeland. Trent, let's start with you. Deliberations been underway now for about 8 hours or so. What does that tell you? The longer this goes on, what?
Well, look, Joe, ordinarily a very quick verdict almost always favors the prosecution. We don't have a quick verdict in this case. And I think some legal commentators have surmised that we would have a quick verdict. I don't think we will, because in part, this has really been a very complicated trial with a complicated set of jury instructions. Remember, the judge himself said towards the end of jury instructions that, look, he was confused by these jury instructions. In fact, he excluded certain parts of the jury instructions. So you can imagine, if this judge is confused, imagine what these jurors who are only experiencing this over the course of the last 2 weeks are thinking themselves while they're in that jury room. So I think at this point, they're sorting through the facts. I think they're sorting through the jury instructions, and they're trying to come to some consensus as to how they will begin their deliberations that have really only been going on over the course of the last several hours.
Mark, let's pick up on these instructions, because the one jury I was on, it really was a roadmap that got us ultimately to the verdict. What is it about this jury instruction sheet? Because they asked for it more. They asked for more copies of it, so they wanted to look into this. What is it that you think in these instructions will be critical to the ultimate outcome?
Well, the instruction on self-defense, I'm thrilled as a defense lawyer, if I'm representing him, that that's what they specifically asked for. You see, the prosecution's argument was that he can't avail himself of the protections under the self-defense law because he provoked everything. He went there with a gun. He shouldn't have been there. And if jurors wanted to buy into that argument, they'd say it doesn't matter what self-defense is. He shouldn't have been there. He brought this on himself. But the fact that they're looking at self-defense very carefully is a benefit to the defendant, because the facts seem to suggest that he reasonably feared death or great bodily harm each time he pulled the trigger.
Trent, let me get you on just a hypothetical. Is it possible that a juror or two at this point gets cold feet and says, you know what, I'm really worried about the backlash here. I'm worried about my safety, my family's safety. I'm worried about my name maybe getting out there. What happens at that point if that were to be the case? Would the judge just then put in an alternate juror?
Well, a couple things, Joe, and typically jurors who feel this way might not voice it, right? They might keep it to themselves. This isn't something they might voice to their other jurors. And if they do, then it's incumbent upon those other jurors to indicate to the judge that we have someone in this room who's not deliberating wholesomely. We have someone in this room who's not participating in the process and is including in the jury deliberation process something that's emotional to them, something personal to them, which again, under the law, can't be part of the process. So I'd be surprised if we see something like that, but if in fact something like that does happen, Joe, hypothetically, the judge, I think, will take that juror into chambers, will voir dire that juror. Can you be fair to the process? Can you look at this case carefully? I think he'll really try to keep that juror, because the last thing this court wants is to begin losing jurors, because this could wind up in a mistrial if that was to happen.
Mark, of all of the memorable moments in this case that made this trial so interesting and watchable beyond this courtroom, what do you make of them, including the latest today where you had the defendant pulling numbers for the final jurors? Have you ever seen that?
No, that's very bizarre. But to me, the moment in this trial was when the defense, who I believe was ahead after the prosecution rested their case, took the extraordinary step of calling the defendant as a witness. That was huge. It's so risky. I've tried over 150 jury trials in my 30-year career. I know I'm so young looking. And I would never, when I'm ahead like that, tell my client to take the witness stand. The good news is he crushed it. He owned the prosecutor. He really answered all the questions that all of us had and filled in the gaps as to why he felt it was necessary to pull the trigger.
Trent, the thing I thought about today was that this really is a case unlike any we've seen, where a jury is basically trying to make sense and hold people accountable for their actions during a street war. I mean, it was a battlefield.
Yeah. I think that's right. I'm not sure that I agree with Mark in terms of the fact that Rittenhouse owned the prosecutor. I think he made some points. I think the prosecutor did put a glove on him once or twice. But I think the reality is, as you said, Joe, this truly was, it looked like anarchy. If you look at any of the videos, you look at anything of the footage from that night, it looked like it was a really, really intense, chaotic scene. And what the prosecution has said is, look, in part, you came to that scene. You came to that chaos, and you obviously added to the chaos. You ignited the chaos. You inflamed it even more. And I think the important part of what the prosecution did in its closing statement was it said, hey, look, he was much like an active shooter. An active shooter,
right.
And we all know by indicating to the jury that this was much like an active shooter, it allows the jurors to tap into their emotion, tap into their common sense, and ask themselves, in the midst of this chaos, in the midst of this violence, you add it to that, you inflame that by bringing a gun and then holding that gun out and inflaming folks so that people didn't realize what they were going to do and whether or not shots had been fired at them, towards them, or anyone else. So I think that part of what the prosecution did late in the case, I think, was really important. The problem is, and I think as Mark has suggested, the defense was ahead. The prosecution should have been doing this early on. When I saw this in their closing statement, I said to myself, where's this energy been? Where's this prosecutor been? Because they were much better in their summation, much better in their closing than they were in any other part of the case.
A lot of people certainly felt that way. Mark Eiglarsh and Trent Copeland, great to have both your voices tonight. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Kamala Harris, Vice President of the United States, former senator, one-time presidential hopeful, and according to the White House this week, vital partner to President Biden. This statement follows a recent report suggesting tensions rising, even a rift between the two. Press Secretary Jen Psaki tweeting in response, for anyone who needs to hear it, the vice president is not only a vital partner to the president, but a bold leader who has taken on key important challenges. This as the poll numbers of both the president and vice president hit new lows. President Biden's approval at 41% and just 28% for Vice President Harris in recent polls. But yesterday at the signing of the infrastructure bill, it was all smiles and embraces. Did that reflect the White House tweet, or was it for show? Washington Post columnist George Will joins us now. George, I'm not sure this would have gotten much traction had Jen Psaki not tweeted about it, but what do you make of all of this in D.C.? As you well know, if there's smoke, there's probably fire.
Well, when Jen Psaki tweeted that, there's certain things that if you say them, they're facially and demonstrably and presumptively untrue, and her tweet would have been one of those. Selecting Ms. Harris to be vice president was the most important decision Mr. Biden made between the announcement of his candidacy and his inauguration. And it was what in tennis is called an unforced error for two reasons. First, he knew that she had dropped out of the presidential scramble 62 days before the first votes were cast in Iowa because she was manifestly unappealing to the electorate. Second, she had criticized him in a debate, famously and fiercely, because he had been insufficiently enthusiastic, in her opinion, about forced busing of school children to achieve racial balance during the 1960s. That was probably the most unpopular social program in the last 50 years, unpopular not least of all with African-American parents. So it was a very strange choice to begin with. Now, rivalries between presidential staffs and vice presidential staffs in the close confines of the White House is not uncommon. That existed between the staffs of Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush, between the staff of President George Herbert Walker Bush and Vice President Dan Quayle, quite normal. But this combined with, as you just said, these astonishingly low poll numbers, particularly astonishing for her. Most Americans have no opinion about vice presidents because they hear very little about them and know very little about them. But for her to be down to 28% is a fire bell in the night.
As I recall, though, George, this was a decision that certainly didn't surprise me. Kamala Harris had run. She'd been vetted, despite the fact that she had dropped out as early as she did in the primaries. And it was also seen as a nod to James Clyburn and what he had done to resurrect Biden's presidential campaign in South Carolina.
There's no question that the disappointment of Democratic women, who are most of the Democratic Party, over the failure earlier of Hillary Clinton, made selection of a woman as vice president a strong presumption.
Right.
However, there were other people out there, and particularly, you're quite right. James Clyburn is as close as we have to a kingmaker in our politics now, and he was owed by Joe Biden. He could have picked, however, and some of us recommended this in our writings, Karen Bass, this congresswoman from California. She's African American. She's from the Los Angeles area. Her district includes Watts. She is substantively very sophisticated, and she's in her 60s and has zero interest in being president. That would have set Mr. Biden up for being a one-term bridge to a better politics for which the nation would have been eternally grateful.
All right, George, so let me get you on this because, again, I get the impression that Democrats in 2020 felt like, okay, listen, hey, we've got a plan A and we've got a plan B, the de facto successor. What do the Democrats do now? Who do you see as a front runner for 24?
Well, they have a terrible problem because if Mr. Biden decides not to run again, and I think the odds are that he will so decide, there is a woman of color standing right next to him, and you have to have a reason not to elevate her to the spot. The reason, of course, is that she's politically weak. Now, there's another woman. She's not African American, but she's been around the track before, which matters in presidential politics. I'm referring to Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, who's sophisticated, well-liked, funny, and now experienced in presidential politics. So there's a workaround for Democrats as we approach 2024. That said, we have to remember the old axiom that in American politics, overnight is a long time and a week is forever.
All right, George, one more thing before we let you go. What concerns you the most about what we're seeing with the Rittenhouse trial? I mean, just as we have to trust and believe in our election system, do we have to do the same with our justice system?
I think so, and what's happening in the courtroom does not bother me at all. What's happening outside the courtroom with people who seem invested in trouble and eager to riot for fun and profit is much more alarming. The idea of pressure being put on the jurors who are, they're not, if I understand this, they're not sequestered.
They're not.
Is quite alarming about the prospects of an untainted jury.
All right, George Will, it's always great to have you, Washington Post columnist and author of the recent book, American Happiness and Discontents. Thanks again, George.
Thank you.
We are still waiting on word from Kenosha. Any news from the jury, and you'll get it here first. And up next, why race is playing such a big role in the conversation outside the courthouse. Also ahead, how about some good news? Danny Fenster reunited with his parents after spending 5 months in a jail in Myanmar. You'll hear from him as he stepped on American soil. Don't forget, you can follow us on social media at The Donlon Report on Twitter. Back after this. We are back as we await the jury's verdict in the murder trial of Kyle Rittenhouse. The community of Kenosha, Wisconsin is bracing itself for potential unrest. Joining us now live from Kenosha is NewsNation's Kelly Beeson. What's the latest there, Kelly?
Well, Joe, I would say the mood here is really anxious anticipation. There's a school just outside of the courthouse. They did virtual learning today. They're planning on doing the same tomorrow, just out of an abundance of caution. Law enforcement here in Kenosha working together. They've released a statement that reads that at the moment, they don't really see any need for closing down roads or doing anything differently to have the community act in any different way than normal, but they are monitoring this situation very closely. Now, the protests outside of the courthouse are growing by the hour. We heard from people on both sides of this issue, some saying that Kyle Rittenhouse should be acquitted, others saying he belongs behind bars.
You can't go back to playing Xbox. You chose and elected to be an adult out here in adult things. Now you got to stand up and go to jail as an adult.
Now, the governor here in Wisconsin also saying that there are approximately 500 National Guard troops ready to deploy here in Kenosha if they're needed. Joe.
All right, Kelly Beeson live for us in Kenosha. Thanks for the update. Joining me now for more on this, retired LAPD Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey and the host of the Mo Kelly Show, Mo Kelly. It's great to have you both. Love having you as regulars on the show. This is an important conversation for us to have. And Sergeant, let's start with you. Race was not an issue in the trial. It wasn't an issue in the courtroom. Why is it such of an issue outside the courtroom?
Well, I think because the genesis of this has to do with the black man, Jacob Blake, who was shot in the back 7 times by a white police officer, Rustin Sheshki. And that's what started this whole thing. And so there's a racial undercurrent. We know that, probably nothing is going to happen to this young man, Kyle Rittenhouse, based on the makeup of the jury and the fact that white folks tend to be sympathetic to their own kind. And so, people who look like me are bracing for the worst.
It may have started that way, Mo, but is it part of this trial alone? Does this case come down to primarily all white people involved, and is it a case about self-defense?
I don't know if you can extract race from this. As W.E.B. Du Bois said, that race is the most intractable issue in our nation. And let's not forget, these cases are not in a vacuum. When you talk about Kyle Rittenhouse, you have to talk about it within the context of an Ahmaud Arbery and white vigilantes. You have to talk about that, and also with respect to George Zimmerman. And also, the Kenosha original unrest was in the same emotional space as Breonna Taylor, the same emotional space as George Floyd, which happened within a 45-day period. So it may not be explicitly about race, but we cannot separate race from this when we think about how the justice system will treat white vigilantes.
How has he been treated differently, Sergeant, in your opinion?
Well, I think because there's a belief, a perception that he's, been given special treatment, that I've seen it referenced VIP treatment. He seems, to me, his demeanor, and I don't know his heart, but he seems very kind of cavalier, very,
what part
I'm just
of the
here
trial
having a good time.
Was he treated differently, Sergeant? How was he treated differently in this trial?
I don't know that he was treated differently. I'm saying that is the perception. That's what's being bantered about on social media, that he was treated as a VIP. I don't know that to be true, but if that's your perception, then it's real in its consequence.
All right, there was a lot of talk about this case beforehand, as we all know, and we've all kind of dug in. Even the president at one point suggested Rittenhouse was a white supremacist. Jen Psaki refused to acknowledge that comment, but did say this yesterday. Let's listen.
We shouldn't have, broadly speaking, vigilantes patrolling our communities with assault weapons. We shouldn't have opportunists corrupting peaceful protests by rioting and burning down the communities they claim to represent anywhere in the country.
So, Mo, to that point, we are all dug in over what may happen here. And again, our perceptions going into this. At the end of the day, does it come down to what happened between Kyle Rittenhouse and why and how he shot these 3 people?
Well, I wish it would come down to that, but a lot of times the appearance or the suggestion of impropriety is enough for people to feel that there is impropriety. This judge, for whatever reasons, has put his finger on the scale. His decisions, his courtroom demeanor, he has not inspired confidence in the process. And so whatever verdict is rendered, it will still come back to this judge as far as dismissing the count, as far as the legal possession of the gun.
So, but wasn't that's Wisconsin law, though, wasn't it? I mean, I looked it up, and it basically says that Wisconsin law states the ban applies to minors armed with rifles or shotguns only if they're short-barreled. I mean, it was a ruling. I don't know what else to make of that.
Yeah, but there's not only that, it's also allowing Kyle Rittenhouse to handpick, my phrase, the own jurors, is something which is not normally done.
Right.
Which, you know, that breeds to lack of inspiring confidence in the process itself, which leads to the verdict.
No, I get that, Sergeant. I know it's unusual, but is it wrong? I mean, he ended up pulling the one black juror in the pool. He didn't know who's who.
Well, listen, again, you know, right, wrong. We see disparate treatment. We see disparities in how Black men are dealt with in the judicial system. We know about the affluenza teen who killed 4 people and injured a total of 9 and was given probation. And so when you look at it in its totality, it always seems as if the scale tips in favor of male white when it comes to you getting a slap on the hand or your bad behavior being minimized and mitigated.
So I'm really struggling with this because I want to agree, and I think we all probably do, that if you look at the numbers, certainly the system's harder on black defendants, whether it's because of money or racism, we agree on that. But the specific facts here in this case are what I keep going back to. People are chasing him. White people are chasing him. A white person says he's going to kill him. A white person hits him with a skateboard. A white person has a gun. The reality is, as a legal matter, not necessarily a moral matter, was he justified in shooting them? And in the end, that's what the question is here.
That may be what the question of what the court is going to decide. But as far as whether people are going to accept that verdict, how they're going to respond to that verdict, this is not going to be in a vacuum. You can't separate Kyle Rittenhouse from the events of Kenosha as far as why he was there in the first place. The fact that he was able to shoot 2 people and was not arrested on the spot, that he was not engaged by law enforcement, the fact that he was treated very differently than other people who presumably would have been in that same circumstance. So I accept your point that maybe not necessarily within the confines or parameters of the case itself and the facts, but as far as how we got here and how we go from here, it does matter.
And the system itself. And Mo, you've led me perfectly into the next thing I wanted to get into. Sergeant, we'll start with you, and that's how this verdict is ultimately accepted. Here's what one of the business owners in Kenosha told us on this broadcast just a little while ago about what he is worried about and what we should learn from what happened here.
We put a Band-Aid on it, and then we wait for the next bomb to blow up. You know, I don't know what to think of it, but it's really scary. We need to work together and come together to resolve these issues and not blow up. There's better ways of doing things than burning down people's towns and neighborhoods and shooting one another.
Sergeant, can that happen after this? Are you worried that there will be more protests?
I absolutely believe there are going to be protests, and I absolutely believe that it's going to be raucous, it's going to be destructive. And, you know, I think everybody, like we do, have changed channels since this thing happened a while ago. And the people who can't change channels are the Blake family and those who are close to him. And so now here everybody's ready to erupt again, and they'll do that for a week or two, and then we'll go back to changing channels until it happens again.
Mo?
I think that the verdict will also have an impact as far as how people respond. It's one thing to protest, but you're also sending the signal, if there is an acquittal, that it is okay for as a 17-year-old to cross state lines with an assault rifle and then engage people for businesses that you don't know, that you have no connection to, and then you, if possibly, you can inspire the circumstances which may lead to you shooting someone.
All right, before we go, Sergeant, we'll start with you. Just your sort of your thoughts on what you think will happen here in the courtroom.
I believe that there'll be an acquittal based on the makeup of the jury, and I think that there'll be protests, and we'll visit this again probably in a week or two with the Ahmaud Arbery case.
Yeah, that one definitely, the racial undertones are there. Those are obvious, and I guess you would call them overtones, not undertones. Mo, what do you think happens?
I think we're going to get an acquittal on the main charges, the lesser included charges. They may be hung up on some of them because this extended deliberation suggests that with the convoluted jury instructions, they may be unclear and unsure.
Host of the Mo Kelly Show, Mo Kelly, and retired LAPD sergeant and author of The Confidence Chronicles, Black and Blue. Cheryl Dorsey, the sergeant, retired from LAPD. It's great to have both your voices tonight. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
It's a simple question. How many children have been in those cages?
I respectfully am not familiar with the term cages and to what you are referring. There are
enclosures in which they are locked in which I took photographs and put them out because you blocked the press and didn't want people to see the Biden cages. The secure facilities in which they are locked down in Donna, those facilities, how many children have been in them?
Well, that was just part of a fiery exchange between Senator Ted Cruz and DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas during a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing this morning. Mayorkas went on to say he doesn't have an exact number on how many children were kept at the Donna facility, just a number of revelations to come out of that hearing today. And we are joined now by Kelly Meyer, live in Washington, D.C., to tell us more about this hearing today. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Joe. Well, the number of migrant encounters is dropping. That could be due to the seasonal patterns as we head into the winter months. But here's the data. The latest number of border encounters from October dropped to about 164,000. That's the third month in a row U.S. Customs and Border Protection has seen a decline since that summer peak. But still, the numbers are way up, a total of 128% from this time last year. And that's what Republican senators grilled the Homeland Security Secretary over here on Capitol Hill. And both Republicans and Democrats agreed that the immigration system is broken, but they don't agree on who is to blame. Take a listen.
I don't think you're calling the shots. I think those shots are being called out of the White House. I think they ought to be here.
And the fact is the Biden administration was handed a system decimated by the previous administration.
And Democrats are calling on Congress to pass comprehensive immigration reform, Joe, but they admit that this is still an unsolved issue here.
All right, Kelly Meyer, thank you for the update. We appreciate it live tonight in Washington, D.C. So how about this? Danny Fenster back on U.S. soil, back with his parents, and certainly happy to be home.
I just have so much gratitude right now for everything everyone's done. I think every action everyone's taken has helped a little bit.
You'll hear more from Danny after the break. Plus, Trevor Reed. He's been in a jail in Russia for almost 2 years, and he just went on a hunger strike. His parents join us. We've talked to them a little while ago. We're going to get an update from them. What's being done to bring him home when we come back? Emotional reunion this morning for American journalist Danny Fenster and his parents. He's back on U.S. soil. The 37-year-old imprisoned for almost 5 months in a Myanmar jail. He was detained while trying to leave the country to visit family. Last Friday, a Burmese court found him guilty of circulating comments that cause fear or spread fake news and sentenced him to 11 years in prison. His release comes after former Ambassador Bill Richardson engaged in face-to-face negotiations. Here is what Fenster had to say this morning.
I spent the last 15 hours on the flight just looking at the coverage across the country in these places that I've lived and seeing people sort of remembering me and pulling together, and it's incredible. I just have so much gratitude right now for everything everyone's done. I think every action everyone's taken has helped a little bit.
Fenster's release is drawing more attention to other Americans who are still being held as political prisoners in foreign countries, including Trevor Reed, who's been in a Russian jail for more than 2 years. He's now at what's been described as a Russian gulag in Siberia. The 30-year-old former Marine sentenced last year for fighting with Russian police, charges Reed and his family strongly deny. Last week, he ended a 6-day-long hunger strike. In a statement he wrote, he's lost a lot of weight and is very sick now. Joining me now, Trevor's parents, Joey and Paula Reed. I have to tell you guys, when we heard about Danny coming home, you guys were literally the first ones we thought of. And we said, you know, they were with us in July. Let's get an update on Trevor. And we didn't realize he had been undergoing this hunger strike at the time. He did resume eating on November 9th, which is a good thing. I think we can all celebrate that. But what's the latest? What's going through your mind right now?
Well, thanks for having us. Yeah, and by the way, we're super happy for Danny Fenster and his family. We know exactly how they feel, or we want to know how they felt today. But yeah, Trevor's sick. We had an attorney visit him yesterday. We're still not. He still hasn't been able to call us for I think 120 days, and so he's sick, and he desperately needs books. We sent 13 books 2 months ago with the ambassador, and they gave him one following his hunger strike, told him he's not getting the rest. So he's still, they said he can write letters now, which they haven't let him do, and we'll see if that's another lie. But we're very concerned about his health right now, and we just want him out of there. Yeah. Apparently he's undertaking things there that even the prisoners in Venezuela and Myanmar haven't done. So it's third world. Right, the conditions you're talking about. Yeah, absolutely. Paula, he wrote in his statement that he was so happy about the help that the embassy has provided. Is that how you were able to get him some of the questions that you were able to ask him?
No, actually the questions are sent through an attorney, but the embassy has been very helpful. And when they went to visit him, he really appreciates those visits. It's hard to be in there without any communication with anyone. So, and we are grateful as well to the help that the embassy is giving us and been taking care of Trevor.
Right. Hopefully we have
checking on him. And every time the embassy, every time we're denied something or he's denied something, the embassy does make a complaint to the Russian government on his behalf.
Joey, one of the questions, I know you asked several of them about his health. Are you sick? Are you getting medical attention? Are you keeping warm? These are all things, as a parent, I'm sure you want to know. But one of the questions that caught me as well was, why haven't you called home? What was the answer to that? They won't let him. And when they do try and let him, or supposedly let him, they say, oh, we can't call international, or, oh, you're out of money on your card, which is a complete lie, like everything else. I put the money on his card. I added more money the other day. He's got enough money to make 50 calls home to the United States on that card. So they're just making up excuses to not let him call us. Paula, as you watched, go ahead, Joey, I'm sorry. By the way, when the United States Embassy calls to check on him or find out anything, the prison essentially hangs the phone up on them. Paula, have you reached out at all to Bill Richardson's group when you saw what he was able to do with Danny Fenster?
No, we haven't yet.
We've spoken to the Richardson Foundation off and on during Trevor's entire incarceration there, but not anything recently. What do you think, Paula, and I'll start with you, it's going to take to get him out?
I think we're going to have to make a deal with Russia that probably America is hesitant to do, but I think we're just going to have to do it because that's the only thing I think that's going to bring Trevor and Paul Whelan home.
Joey, what do you think it'll take? I think it's going to take some sort of negotiation, and I think that Governor Richardson hit it on the head today at his press conference, saying the things that it takes to make those type of agreements or negotiations. Right. Well, listen, again, to see this reunion today with the Fensters and to think of you guys, literally, as soon as we saw it, we are hoping for the best, and we can't wait for that same scene when Trevor does come home. Joey and Paul. Yeah, I'm sure. Hey, thank you for the update. We'll continue to think of you and Trevor, and we'll talk soon, huh? Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We do have some breaking news here. According to the New York Times, the FDA plans to approve Pfizer's COVID-19 booster shots for all adults as early as Thursday. Under that scenario, any adult would be eligible for the booster shot 6 months after their second vaccine shot. Moderna expected to submit its request to the FDA for booster approval soon, but we did get that word and wanted to pass it along. NBC's Stephanie Ruhle over the weekend. Last night, we told you about Twitter asking if the media was out of touch for comments like that, saying the average American can afford higher prices. Well, today we got retail sales data for October. It turns out she might have been right. Retail sales jumped 1.7% last month compared to September, the largest month-to-month gain since March of this year. Sales are up more than 16% over last year and more than 21% above the pre-pandemic levels. Americans notably spent more at gas stations, up more than 4%. On automobiles, nearly 2%, while spending on everything from sporting goods to musical instruments and books all went up as well. Holiday shopping may have gotten off to an early start, too, as we've discussed here, as supply chain issues continue to impact businesses throughout the country. Hopefully the economy continues to recover and we'll all be okay for the holidays. All right. Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.